This is good. Now I really. What's your name?
Le pongo una almohadita atrás.
Try name. So Kirtan class, Kirtan again. Amala Kirtan singing after your class. Keep that in mind.
Well, no, then I can't see Krishna. I could just. Why don't we just put this chair over here?
So you want to see? Is that okay with you?
It changes things a little bit. But let me see.
The second part. Maha-bharata.
Oh, this is Krishna Sundari. Yes. And Jaya Sita. Mark and they will join them soon. Ananda, Krishna's daughter. Yes.
The microphone is open.
Yeah.
Yes.
More people.
Now you succeeded. What's this?
Amala singing later. Amala is singing after Poppins.
Here goes nothing. Hare Krishna. A little more this way. You have to see my. Make sure they can see my hands before you.
¿Quiere que le avisen algún tiempo en específico? Después, ¿quiere que le avisen algún tiempo? Like 40 minutes, 30 minutes, 1 hour? And then Amala Kirtan is going to sing.
Oh,
and
it depends on how much fun I'm having.
Okay.
So, let's see. Gracias, caballero.
Un gusto. Para servirle.
Whoops. I have my glass in front of Prabhupada.
You can put it up there
No,
between the
see,
faces.
maybe like this. See. Yes. Are you gonna steal my phone again?
I saved it. All Chris kept. I'm gonna see. It's on.
Hare Krishna. First, I'd like to thank Krishna Sundari. Where's Krishna Sundari?
She's coming back.
Oh,
She'll be back.
she'll be back. And Jaya Sita. The most famous cello player in Lord Chaitanya's movement. And also Ananda. Oh yeah, and there was a great mridanga player who we won't name. That was Markandeya. So this festival is really Krishna's mercy. We can all see and feel and experience directly Krishna's love for us and Krishna's mercy. And it's really especially enlivening to see the young devotees, as we say in this business, Guru Coolies. Jai Sita, who's actually much younger than me. And so it's really very, very encouraging. Prabhupada, I've said this many times, but whenever I was with Prabhupada in his room, and parents would come in with their children. In those days, almost all of the children in ISKCON were very young. And Prabhupada, of course, would, play with the kids a bit. And then he would always look at us very seriously and say, take care of them. They are the future hope. And so Prabhupada, so we are seeing here the future hope of our movement. Amala Kirtan, who's also going to be singing. He sang very beautifully yesterday. Also a Guru Cooli. So none of you should feel threatened by all these Guru Coolies. Krishna Dana is also there, who was an extraordinary dancer and an old friend of mine since she was born. So, our topic today is Nanda Leela.
Universality of the Mahabharata.
Thank you. The universality of the Mahabharata. And I talked about this in my earlier lectures. But of course, that won't stop me now. At the present time, there is an attempt by some people to bring what they perceive as justice to the world by dividing everyone up according to their bodily designations. The idea being that everyone that has a particular type of body based on ethnicity, race, gender, whatever, should fight against people who have other kinds of bodies so that everyone can get their piece of the pie. And but actually, Krishna consciousness is also deeply concerned with justice and deeply concerned with the happiness of all living beings. We go about it the right way, in the opposite way, and that is, rather than forcing everyone or pressuring everyone to identify with their body and, what has your group done against this group of bodies or those bodies or the other bodies. Krishna consciousness means to see that actually no one is their body and that we all deserve equal justice, equal dignity, not because I'm going to fight for my body category, but because we're all eternal souls. And so Krishna consciousness raises people up to a common denominator, rather than putting everyone against everyone, every body group fighting every other body group. And so I was making this point in one of my talks that we in Krishna consciousness, if we are really followers of Prabhupada, we of course understand and try to practice and try to teach our philosophy. But our philosophy includes clearly in the Bhagavatam, in the Gita, and certainly in Prabhupada's teachings, political philosophy, social philosophy. And so it's a big mistake to think that Prabhupada only presented some type of sort of narrow theology, and that therefore in political and social matters, we can throw away Krishna consciousness and just, jump into the mud and roll around in the mud with everyone, fighting for this or for that. We are supposed to be brahmanas on our better days. We are supposed to be brahmanas, and we're supposed to understand and teach. And the Bhagavatam, Krishna, and Prabhupada have given us a perfect philosophy, which includes social philosophy, political philosophy. So we can be sensitive to the feelings of people on this poor planet right now, but we want to bring them Krishna's teachings on how to organize human societies, how society should be governed, how different classes of people, whether they are economic classes or vocational classes, how they should be integrated so that society is peaceful and functions in the most efficient way. So we don't need to jump on the bandwagon. We don't need to follow mundane philosophies, which to a great extent arise from envy, lust, greed for power, and so on. But rather we want to present our philosophy, which includes all aspects of life. So in that sense, also the Mahabharata, actually, in a sense, it's not just the Mahabharata. I think I would like to expand the concept here a bit. Mahabharata is a book. It's an extremely large book. Although actually, the Mahabharata became really like a Vedic library. It became a repository for basically anything that Brahmins thought the world should know about. Whether it was, I even found I forget the exact percentage, but something like a fourth of the entire Mahabharata is just Bhishma Dev's final instructions lying on the bed of arrows. And why? Because it was kind of like, tell me when I'm in trouble. It was kind of like, whenever I think of that, I always think of an East European soup. Obvious analogy there, so I won't bother explaining it further. No, actually, because I had this image, like in the old days, maybe not even just East Europe, just in medieval times, they had this huge, cast iron pot on the stove, and anyone in the house that just liked some vegetable, just throw it in the pot. Throw this in the pot, throw that in the pot. And so the especially the deathbed, the bed of arrow instructions of Bhishma, but other parts of Mahabharata is kind of like over thousands of years. Even things like here, Bhishma is on his deathbed, and what's he talking about according to the Hindu Mahabharata, sort of that corrupted version? Like on a certain day of the month, is it better to give mustard seeds or sesame seeds to a Brahmin? I mean, riveting in its own way. But clearly, well, I don't want to keep you in suspense any longer about that question. But so the point is that clearly you find all kinds of things in the Mahabharata, which, in fact, according to the Encyclopedia Britannica, which is, does someone think they had a good idea? What is it? That's all right. Happens in the best of summer guys, right? So, so the Mahabharata is one book, which we are, working with, but then there's the Bhagavatam. The Bhagavatam, as I said before, is it tells a lot of these stories. It really gives all the headlines, the really important events of the Mahabharata. And if something's not in the Bhagavatam, it's because it wasn't considered to be absolutely essential. Doesn't mean it didn't happen. And so really we're looking at the Mahabharata, we're looking at the Bhagavatam, because you can't really understand the Mahabharata unless you understand the Bhagavatam. Because the Bhagavatam has so many, course corrections, as you might say. It corrects the narrative in so many ways. For example, the Mahabharata, there's some wild story of the passing of King Parikshit, where he's unrecognizable as King Parikshit. Where when he's cursed, he's not thinking, now I'm going to become Krishna conscious. He's thinking, I have to save my neck. And so he has this little palace, little mini palace built on a pole, on one thin pole, very high. And at the base of the pole, there are all these guards. And then he's up there on top, until the day passes. We won't get bitten by the snake bird. And then the snake bird comes disguised as a Brahmana, and with a basket of fruit for the king. It's always an acceptable gift, a basket of fruit. And so inside the fruit is this poison. Actually, as the snake bird somehow gets inside the basket of fruit, and then bites the king. Obviously, if you're going to build a big pole like that and go to all that trouble, you're not going to just say, oh, sure, bring me I've never met you in my life. I have no idea who you are, but sure, bring a basket of fruit right up the pole.
Mahabharata meets Sleeping Beauty.
So things like that, which I felt, but of course we know in the Bhagavatam, it's not what I feel. It's in the Bhagavatam, we find out who Parikshit really is. He's a pure devotee. He's declared to be not only a pure devotee at his birth, because they had what are called Jatakovidas, which means birth experts. They were sages who were expert in astrology. They would read all the signs when someone was born, and they would give a reliable, authoritative description of who this person is. And so when Parikshit was born, they did all their calculations, and they were astonished, because they were just astonished to find out who Parikshit was. And he's still a baby at this time. And I think in one of the most poignant verses in the Bhagavatam, they declare that he will be Maha-bharata Mahan. He will be a great, great devotee, Maha-bharata. And so completely different understanding of who Parikshit is. And so if we want to understand who Parikshit really is, you can't just read the Mahabharata. You have to read the Bhagavatam. And there are many stories like that, actually. For example, the Mahabharata tends to always kind of give a pass to Dhritarashtra, because he's the grandfather and he's blind and so on. But in the Bhagavatam, he's held more to account. The Bhagavatam is more strict with Dhritarashtra and the things he did. So there are many differences. And it's basically the same story. So it's really not just Mahabharata. It's really the story of God coming to this world. There's one very famous Christian song, the music for which was written by Handel, my favorite composer. And you probably heard it. It's "Joy to the World, the Lord has come." And so really, Krishna coming to this world is the most important thing that ever happened on this planet. It's the most important thing that ever happened on this planet. Krishna intervened in human history. And right there, you know that the world is not a closed causal system. There are interventions from outside the physical system. And so, and then Lord Chaitanya came. That's sort of like a follow-up, like a service contract on the first avatar, in the sense that, as Prabhupada always said, Krishna explained surrender to me. People couldn't quite understand what that means. So Lord Chaitanya came and said, okay, do it like this. And then he showed how to surrender to Krishna. It's Krishna showing how to surrender to Krishna. So, but this is meant to be the people's book. And the last time I looked, the Mahabharata is not like sweeping the world, knocking Star Wars and, and what is it, the Tolkien stories is knocking them right out of the box, taking over as the great epic, multi-billion-dollar movie franchise. Lord of the Rings, yeah, exactly. We call that, it's not happening. And the Mahabharata was specifically composed because most people are not philosophical, much less theological, and therefore there's need for a book just for people in general, and that's the Mahabharata, because people, it's just like some people can't drink their whiskey straight. How do I know that? Because, hey, I'm your guru, no refunds. But no, because I've heard people say things like that. So, right. We have some skeptics in the audience. So, but the idea is that a lot of people can't take their Krishna straight. It's like a little, it's a little too heavy a tonic. Because if you think about it, we're in this material world because we're envious of Krishna. So to have a book that's just Krishna, a lot of people, it's just too much Krishna for them in their present pitiable state. So, so therefore, Krishna is so kind. He doesn't force himself on people. He's a very nice guy. So Krishna gave the world another book where, okay, you don't want so much of me all at once. So do this book, and you can hear a lot about my devotees, the Pandavas. So here are these 5 princes. So that's what the Mahabharata is for. It's really meant for people who can't take too much Krishna at one time. And so Krishna is in the Mahabharata, and he's even mundane scholars recognize that it's really about Krishna. That it's really, even the Western scholars see that it's really about Krishna. But you're seeing Krishna, and you're seeing all these events through the eyes of so-called human beings, through the eyes of the Pandavas. And just as Lord Chaitanya came to show us how to serve Krishna, so the Pandavas came to show the readers of the Mahabharata how to deal with Krishna. So that's actually Krishna's mercy, the Mahabharata. But if you know in the Bhagavatam, after Vyasa had already composed the Mahabharata, he was still unhappy because the Mahabharata made a lot of the Mahabharata is like the original Hare Krishna bridge program. They call these bridge preaching programs where, oh, sure, it's yoga, it's astrology, it's Vastu Shastra. Is this Hare Krishna? No. So in that sense, the Mahabharata's the original Hare Krishna bridge program. But the problem is, how do you get people to the other side of the bridge? Because, like that old saying, why did the chicken cross the road? to get to the other side. So why did the conditioned soul cross the bridge? So you have to want to get to the other side. Otherwise, we have a lot of programs in ISKCON, which sometimes work. A lot of times I would call them more foot of the bridge programs, because people come up to the foot of the bridge and, no, I don't think so. They just kind of stay on the wrong side of the bridge. So something like that happened with the Mahabharata, where Vyasa wrote this great story full of all the, the really interesting things in life, sex and violence. And so, but the point is, people weren't crossing the bridge. They were just kind of staying on the mundane side of it. And so therefore, and Vyasa was unhappy. So Narada Muni came, and Vyasa, of course, very respectfully greeted his spiritual master. And then Narada asked him kind of a very sarcastic question and said, hey, you enjoying life, identifying with the body and the mind, life good? And of course, Vyasa was really, was not happy. So then Narada spoke this really heavy verse. I mean, he didn't speak a verse. He just said something, which then became a verse. He wasn't thinking, now I'm going to speak a verse. So, they were just talking to each other. So he spoke this verse where he said that Jugupsitam dharma kritenu shasata. So bhavaraktasya mahan vyatikrama. This is really tough love. So if you look up what these words mean in the dictionary, the first word he said is Jugupsitam, which in Sanskrit means terrible, awful. Really, I feel like I'm authorized now to, really speak heavily to my disciples, but I'm kidding. Don't worry. I'm not going to. So, but he said, Jugupsitam, he said, Dharma krite, for the sake of Dharma. Because Mahabharata is famous as a Dharma Shastra. So for the sake of Dharma, because you wanted people to be virtuous and follow Dharma, and so something really terrible is done. Jugupsitam dharma kritenu shasata sabhavaraktasya mahan vyatikrama. Because you were trying to sort of bring people along who are very attached to their conditioned natures. Sabhavaraktasya. And therefore the result is mahan vyatikrama, which very literally means a great transgression. Because vyati means trans and krama means gression, which means going, like regress, progress, and so on. So gress is sort of an English stem meaning to go in a certain direction, regress, ingress, so on and so forth. So he said, Mahan vyatikrama, great transgression. And then he said, Subhavarak, he said, people, Jat bhaktyato dharmiti tarojana namanyate tasini varanangjana. This is very good advice for all the bridge builders out there. And that is, Narada said that once you give people license, once you tell people, oh, you can do this, oh, you can do that, then namanyate tasini varanam. They will never let you take it away from them. So this is the danger of bridge programs. If you're not just honest with people, little bit of sugar makes the medicine go down. Mary Poppins Uvacha, one of the famous teachers of the Hare Krishna movement, Mary Poppins. So, but the idea here is nivarana means, it's like nirvana. Nirvana means like to stop something. And so namanyate, they won't accept. If you tell them now, you can do whatever you want, no problem. Do you guys have any rules? No, we just want to feed you and clean up after you and engage you in chanting, but no, we don't have any rules. But then people won't want to, they feel like they've already been authorized to continue with their sort of, somewhat libertine lifestyle. So it's very interesting. So the Mahabharata, we have sort of like Adi bridge program. And then the first bridge, and then we have Narada Muni's critique of the bridge program, which is very interesting. Anyway, so after Narada told his disciple Vyasa, just be straightforward, explain what's really going on. And then Narada left. And then what did Vyasa do? So when Narada leaves, that's the end of chapter 6 of the first canto. Then in the beginning of chapter 7, what happens? Vyasa, who's obviously, he's an avatar, he's very advanced, he goes into samadhi. He can just do that. It's just like, you can go into your kitchen or you can go into your living room. Vyasa can just go into samadhi. It's like samadhi on demand. So Vyasa went into samadhi, and then he actually he saw 3 things. He saw Maya, he saw Krishna, and he saw the soul. So he kind of got lined up again. And then he began, and so he immediately in that same chapter begins to retell the Mahabharata. It begins Yadam Radhe Singha Kodava Singhayanam. What is that? Vira Gating Gateshu. Vireshwata Vira Gating Gateshu. So on the battlefield, Yada, when on the battlefield, Yadam Radhe. Kaurava Sinjayanam, of the Kauravas and the Yadus and other armies and the Pandavas. And when Videshato Vidagatin Gateshu, when all the heroes had gone to the destination of heroes, which means when they were dead. Because it's kind of almost sarcastic that okay, you want to be a hero. Yeah, you probably die in the battlefield. So he immediately goes back to the battle of Kurukshetra. And then what else happens in that first canto? Then we see Bhishma on the bed of arrows when he begins to praise Krishna. And so you begin to see that the whole Mahabharata story is not just a mundane battle story. It's not just a mundane history. Pure devotees came down to this planet and they staged this super production, this super drama to attract people of earth. And so in the prayers of Bhishma, you find out that at least at this point in his life, he's actually a pure devotee. And then you get the prayers of Queen Kunti, and you find out she's a pure devotee. And then you see the Pandavas at their most intense point of Krishna consciousness, because you see Arjuna coming back from Dwarka with the news that Krishna has left this planet. And so you see Arjuna in what is called Viraha Bhakti, feeling this intense separation, almost unbearable separation from Krishna. Yudhishthira responds in a similar way. So you're seeing the cast of characters, Kunti, Bhishma, the Pandavas. You're seeing them, their real identities. They're actually pure devotees. And this is something which comes out to some extent in the Mahabharata, but not at all clearly enough. And then you get a correction of the Parikshit story, because the Mahabharata, which had become corrupted, then you get the real Parikshit story and who he really is. And so that's 2/3 of the first canto. 2/3 of the first canto of the Bhagavatam is narrative correction of the Mahabharata. So that's my point, that it's not just the Mahabharata, it's really God coming to this world. And then looking at all the available information. The Mahabharata gives us some information, and the Bhagavatam gives us also very powerful. Just to give one thing, which some people think I'm the worst thing since burnt rice prasadam. But we are supposed to be recommending Vedic culture. So can I, in good faith, recommend to people out there a culture in which a woman can legally be treated as mere property? In which a woman can just be gambled, like, okay, I'll give you, 2 chariots, 3 swords, and my wife, or something like that. So in my view, no. In my view, how could I in good conscience say that this is a supreme culture for human beings when women are treated as property? And Krishna himself in the Mahabharata, because it's not all corrupt, Krishna himself declares that women cannot be treated as property. Krishna himself says this, which makes you wonder if Draupadi could actually be legally gambled. So I'll say more about that, but when Arjuna went to Dwarka and he fell in love with Krishna's own sister, Subhadra, who was very, very beautiful, and they decided to elope. It's called the Subhadra Harana Leela, when Arjuna took away Subhadra, but she was actually, it's very interesting. If you want to know the role of women, what women were really like back then, if you look at the Mahabharata, for example, when Arjuna was eloping with Subhadra, it turned out, it just so happened, that this very nice, chaste lady was an expert in driving a war chariot. So obviously she wasn't spending all of her life making flower garlands. I mean, I have nothing against making flower garlands to deities. It's a wonderful service. Or for example, one time when Krishna went to visit the Pandavas at Indraprastha, and it was the summer, it was very hot. So they had vacation places back then. They had resorts. The Mahabharata describes that, for example, if people in Dwarka, they would cross to the mainland, and there was a place called Raivataka Mountain, and it was a resort center. That's where they'd go for vacations. And when the Pandavas were in Indraprastha, they had vacation areas down by the Jamuna River. And so when Krishna went there, they all went, the Krishna, the Yadus and the Kuras went down to the river for a vacation. And it's described there was a wrestling tournament. What's interesting is about this wrestling tournament, it was for the women. These were Kshatriya ladies, and they had a wrestling tournament. Or for example, sometimes you'll hear someone will quote something like, and here's something in the Mahabharata, where someone you've heard of says that a wife must follow her husband, whether he's right or wrong. So some people will quote that, but what's the actual story? The actual story is very different. First of all, the person that said that is the great Pandu. He said it to Kunti because Kunti had given him 3 sons, and then Madri kind of double dipped, and she brought the twin Ashwins. And then Pandu wanted to have more sons because among Kshatriyas, they didn't always have a long lifespan. Kshatriyas were subject to early death because they're warriors. So he wanted more sons. And he went back to Kunti, and Kunti said, "Are you serious?" It's kind of like she said, "You want me to have a kid with every deva in heaven? What's the world going to think?" And that's when Pandu quoted that, "My dear wife, a woman has to follow her husband whether he's right or wrong." So what does Kunti do? She says, "No way." And Kunti sort of smashes his argument, and so Pandu, as the man, gets the last word. "Yes, dear." And that was it. And that's the end of it. So you can quote that thing, but then if you look at the actual story, and so why were these stories put in there? For example, the Bhagavatam. I've made this point many times, so if this is a rerun for you, I'm sorry. But Krishna was in this world for about 125 years. And I take it for granted that Krishna did at least, 5 or 6 really interesting things every day. I mean, I can't imagine it's having an off day. What's happening? No, not much. It's just kind of boring today. So Krishna, if you multiply 125 by 365 by 5 or 6, Krishna performed thousands and thousands of very interesting pastimes. But in the Bhagavatam, we get a tiny fraction of them. That's something people need to keep in mind. If you read the 10th canto, you're not like learning about everything Krishna did. You're getting a very small fraction of what Krishna did. So what does that mean? What that means is that the pastimes that made it into the 10th canto were extremely selective. Because if you're Vyasa and you've got thousands of pastimes to choose from, but you've only got room for maybe 50 or something, or 100 at most, that means the pastimes that were chosen for the 10th canto were very intentionally chosen because they were considered to be extremely instructive. And so then we have this pastime of the Dvija Patni Gana, or the wives of the Brahmins. And basically it's a pastime which shows very clearly that the women were much more intelligent than the men. And so that pastime is that Krishna's cowherd boyfriends were hungry, which it's encouraging. It shows that, many of us are actually bona fide devotees because we are certainly always hungry. Kind of like you shall know the Vaishnava because he's always hungry. So Krishna's cowherd boyfriends, and they complain, they said to Krishna, we're really hungry. So Krishna said, there are some Brahmins performing a sacrifice, and they're just getting to the point where the food is offered and it's available for distribution. So go beg them for food. So the cowherd boys went there. They begged the Brahmins for food. Very learned, very proud, and the Brahmins just they're almost offended that these third-class people, these cowherd boys, would even ask them. So they sent the boys away. Now they're really hungry. So they went back to Krishna, and he said, well, go back and this time ask their wives. And so they went back to ask the wives, and the wives were ecstatic that they could do something for Krishna. And so they gathered all the food they could carry, and they were going to set out to go to Krishna and feed his friends. And then what's very interesting about this story, and these are intentional stories, Krishna designed these pastimes. These pastimes are choreographed. They're designed. It kind of just happened that way. No. So every imaginable male authority figure forbade the women to go to Krishna. Like their husbands, their grown sons, fathers, brothers, everyone. You get the whole package. All the male authority figures told them not to go, and they just basically said, forget you. We're going to Krishna. So they did go to Krishna, and then the Brahmins were enlightened by their wives. And they said that we were fools and our wives were much more intelligent than us. And they learned and they were ashamed of themselves. So the point here is that this is real. When I read the Bhagavatam, even when I read the Mahabharata, what strikes me is these are real people. These are real people, and they act like real people. No marriage can be happy if the man bullies his wife or if the wife, bullies her husband. Marriages are peaceful when people respect each other. They respect each other, and they just find a way to cooperate. And that's exactly what happened back then. So that's the real Vedic culture. It's a culture of real men and real women who had to get along, and therefore they just had to cooperate with each other. And sometimes the men were right, and sometimes the women were right. Sometimes the men were more intelligent, and sometimes the women were more intelligent. That's the real so-called Vedic culture. Real people doing real things. So, what's that?
He said that would make a good bumper sticker. Vedic culture, real people doing real things.
I like that. So, so that's what I'm trying to do. I'm kind of, trying to see what was really going on back then. Who were these people? What were their real feelings? So any questions so far on these points? Palaka. Oi, gente boa.
No seu livro, The Quest of Justice, o senhor falou que o encontro de Krishna com os Pandavas foi bem tarde. O senhor podia explicar um pouco mais como que veio essa devoção dos Pandavas, se eles não conheciam Krishna pessoalmente?
Clever question. Palaka asked, there's a scene in the Mahabharata, which is actually a Draupadi Swayamvara, where for the first time in their life, the Pandavas see Krishna. For the first time in that life. So how are they devoted to Krishna if they just met him? I mean, how did we end up in the Hare Krishna movement? That's the real question. So the point is that, first of all, the Pandavas are eternal devotees of Krishna. There is such a thing as love at first sight. I mean, sometimes you meet someone. I think we've all had this experience where you meet someone and you just know right away, we are going to be friends and we're going to be good friends. And so it just, because some people are just kind of made to be friends or made to be husband and wife or whatever, you just know it. The Pandavas are pure devotees. And it's really funny. I mean, and actually in that scene, one thing I find really interesting about that scene is the Mahabharata in a very sort of a subtle way reveals Krishna's identity. Because the Pandavas, they went to, not Varna, but Ekachakra, where they disguised themselves as Brahmins. It's funny, the reason they disguised themselves for two reasons. Number one, because that was their first culture. They grew up high in the Himalayan mountains in a community of sages. And so it's like, for example, let's say Spanish is your first language. Even if you later learn another language, actually, Christian Donnie, remember you told me that. I mean, how you like Spanish. So that's what you learn. That's when you were a baby. Your parents spoke to you in Spanish. So when something's your first language, you can be, you can ultimately, for example, be in an environment or a country where you're most of the time speaking another language, but that's kind of like your comfort language. And you can do it really well. You speak without an accent. So in the same way, the Pandavas' first cultural language was actually as sages. And they, and they spoke sage culture without an accent. So it's very interesting. Whenever they have to disguise themselves, they can fall back on, because they can do a perfect simulation of a Brahmin, because that's how they grew up. So the Pandavas, another reason they disguise themselves as Brahmins, frankly, so they could wear baggy clothes. Brahmins are not like the sharpest dressers on the planet. And so, they could kind of wear these robes that would disguise the fact that these guys were like ridiculously muscular. And, and no one who actually saw them without their robes was ever going to believe they were Brahmins. And so, it served different purposes. So they were there. Anyway, so they were there, and then a sage. It's very interesting because they had BNN, the Brahmin News Network, in the sense that there were sages traveling around the country that in those days, some sages would travel, and that was actually the news network, because sages would come and I was in Hastinapur a month ago, and this is what's happening, or I was in Mathura, and this is what the Yadus are doing. And so, in a sense, the traveling sages were the news service. And so some of these Brahmins came into Ekachakra and reported that Draupadi was going to have a Swayamvara. And she was almost like unhuman how beautiful she was. Because actually she wasn't human. She was a goddess. So, And so then the Brahmin said, hey, why don't you guys go? You look maybe, not exactly skinny. And so anyway, so the Pandavas decided to go to Panchala. It's very interesting. If you look at a map, exactly what their route would have been. So they went from Ekachakra down to Panchala, probably passing through the Kuru lands if you look at the geography. And so, so they got there. They were in disguise. No one knew who they were, because the world knew or thought they knew that the Pandavas are dead. So if you believe that someone has died and it's been confirmed they died, you're not gonna think that you saw them. So the Pandavas were in disguise, kind of wearing these Jedi knight robes, and and it's funny because no one could detect them. No one knew who they were. And you get this one really funny scene where Krishna's standing with Balaram, and they're just kind of, lounging around, relaxing, waiting for the action to start. And Krishna says, hey, I bet that's Yudhishthira, and I bet that's Arjuna, and that's Bhima. So immediately you know that Krishna has knowledge beyond what any human being knows. It's a very interesting story. And then when Arjuna actually wins Draupadi, and they take them away, and they have to fight their way out of it. It's funny. Swayamvara is, it's like, even if you win the girl, you still have to fight your way out of the arena. And so, so then they get back to their place, and Drupada suddenly realizes he has no idea who just took his daughter. So if you're a father and you have a daughter, you have no idea who just took your daughter away. So he decides, I've got to find out. He has no idea. So he sends his famous son, Drishtadyumna. Who will kill Drona, actually. So he sends Drishtadyumna to the Pandavas' camp to spy on them. By the way, the Mahabharata that ancient culture was very spy intensive. I mean, they had the equivalent of the CIA, the FBI, and I mean, they really did. And if you think that, well, how much could they spy without our modern equipment? I'll just give you one example from the Romans, who are halfway back to Krishna, by the way. Actually, maybe only 40% of the way back if you get to the Roman Empire. There was a plot in the Roman Senate, and this is before Christ, actually. There was a plot in the Roman Senate to assassinate Julius Caesar. I won't give my personal views on that, but anyway, there was a plot to assassinate Caesar, and they did assassinate Caesar. The Roman Senate was the House of Lords. It was the richest, most powerful people. The Roman Senate was the House of Lords. The Roman Assembly was the House of Commons. And so when they killed Caesar, that unleashed a civil war because Caesar had his allies like Mark Antony. And the senators had their generals and everything. So a civil war broke out. And, to be brief, the allies of Caesar won that civil war. And so as soon as the day they won that war, every Roman senator who had taken part in killing Caesar was wanted dead or alive. They were all wanted men. And again, you have to remember, these were the aristocrats. They had money. They had private militias. They could go anywhere in the world. They did go to many different places. They had their own military forces. They could bribe people to keep a secret. And the Romans, their intelligence service was so powerful, with the simple technology they had, that within approximately a year, moving at the speed things moved back then, within maybe a year and a half, every one of those senators, and there were dozens of them, every one of those senators that killed Caesar was dead. They had nowhere to run. They had nowhere to hide. The Roman intelligence service was that efficient. So imagine in the times of the Pandavas and Krishna. So what we have to understand, and you need to understand this to really to grasp what's going on in the Mahabharata and kind of read past some of the fables and see what's really going on, is that they had very powerful, extremely efficient spy networks. They had their CIA, they had their FBI, they had all those things. And so, so Drishtadyumna is sent to spy on the Pandavas. And he's this guy to figure out, like, who are they? Are they Brahmins? Are they Kshatriyas? Are they Vaishyas, Shudras? What are they? In fact, Drupada, because he realizes, his daughter had a Swayamvara, the woman chooses the conditions. It's called Swayamvara, literally means personal choice. And it was a personal choice in the sense that the girl set the rules, and the rules were set up to favor the guy she wanted. So because Arjun won her, as they say, fair and square, Drupadi didn't know, so he had to set up, because there were different marriage ceremonies for Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, Sudras. So he had to prepare all four, because he didn't know who the heck Arjuna was. So Drishtadyumna goes to spy on the Pandavas in disguise, and he comes back and he tells his father, I don't know exactly what they are, but they're definitely not Brahmins. Because they're like, once they kind of take their baggy robes off, these guys are, and they have scars all over their bodies. And they also have particular scars which came from shooting arrows all the time, because if you keep shooting arrows, you get certain kinds of calluses and scars on your hands. And so he said, they are not Brahmins. And he said, all they talk about is war and battles. I mean, they're not chanting the Vedas. Anyway, that's an interesting story. I mean, it's so. Any other question? Yes, Swargi. Swargi, I've known practically since she was born. She is one of the illustrious Guru Kulis.
When you were talking about women not being property, you mentioned.
Oh, Krishna. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you. I left that out. And so Subhadra, it turns out, as a chaste, shy Vedic woman, is expert at driving a war chariot. And so she's driving the chariot. Arjun's not hurting anybody, just like deflecting all their weapons, and they ride off. And so the Yadus are furious because they're very proud. The Yadus are very proud. I mean, they know who they are. They know who Krishna is, and they're very proud. And they have this fabulous assembly hall, like their Congress building, this fabulous assembly hall called the Sudharma, like the hall where good laws are made. And so they're really agitated, and even Balaram's agitated because Arjun didn't get their blessings, didn't give them any gifts, and just, went off with their most important princess, and without giving them gifts, and so Krishna just stands up and says, sort of in modern language, chill everybody. Krishna just stands up and says, calm down. Women, don't talk about Arjun didn't give gifts. Women are not property. You don't buy them and you don't sell them. And so in civilized societies, you can't gamble a woman as the stake. Like, okay, I'll put in the woman, these are my chips. Now, what's interesting is that if you look at the Bhagavatam, just as the Bhagavatam corrects the Parikshit story, what does the Bhagavatam say about the offense to Draupadi in the gambling hall? Nothing about an attempt to strip her. Nothing about her being gambled. When the Pandavas lost all their weapons, they committed a great offense against her by pulling her by her hair, touching her hair, and pulling her into a men's gambling hall, which was about as seedy and blood as that sounds, a men's gambling hall. And so they dragged her in, they touched her hair, And nothing about gambling her, nothing about trying to strip her. That's the Bhagavatam. And the Bhagavatam mentions this incident 5 times. So certainly if the Bhagavatam wanted to talk about gambling a woman, 5 times it's mentioned in different parts of the Bhagavatam, not a word about gambling her. And according to Jiva Goswami, our highest authority is the Bhagavatam. Just saying. Another point, not only could you not gamble a woman like that, because, you know, it was actually a civilized culture, even though there's some bad people there, but the offense of just touching her hair, the offense of even touching a respectable woman against her will was punishable by death. So if you read the Bhagavatam, you get a very different picture of how women were treated. And there's a verse in the Bhagavatam where Draupadi curses these people, these offenders, and she says that because you let down my hair, all of your wives will let down your hair, because that's what women did at funeral ceremonies. And it said that when Krishna heard of Draupadi's curse, Krishna said, I will personally enforce it. So are women property to be gambled? No. Women are citizens who, if you just touch them against their will, that's punishable by death. So, especially the way they offended Draupadi. So in fact, the Bhagavatam says, Kacha sparsha hatayusha. Kacha sparsha. Kacha means hair. Sparsha means touching. Because they touched her hair, their ayusha. That's where you get Ayurveda. Ayur means duration of life. So the Ayurveda is knowledge about extending the duration of life. That's what it literally means. And so the plural is ayusha, that their duration of life was cut down because they touched her hair. So that shows you how women were treated in that culture. Not property to be gambled. So, Jaya Bhagavatam. It's so what I'm trying to do is kind of see what's really going on back then. What was the actual culture? Yes, I believe your name is Bhaktavatsal, right?
I believe you gave me that.
That was good. That was really good.
So I told Jyoti this story. I heard you at John Green's house tell us this before. And I brought it up with Jyoti, who painted that painting. And took personal instruction from Srila Prabhupada.
Yes.
So why did Prabhupada do that if it never happened?
Okay, to understand that,
It's a glass of water and they're going around.
glass of water. Is this kind of like a community drink or something? Oh, for me?
No, it's for me.
Oh, no, I want all the water glasses. This gurus to be very possessive. Anyway, okay, why did Prabhupada teach that story? What I have found repeatedly in our tradition, including the 6 Goswamis, including Jiva Goswami, including Prabhupada, is that the acharyas are very, very strict about theology. You know, what is our theology? What is our philosophy? And they're much more relaxed and don't mind debating each other about Leela details. So you'll find Sanatana Goswami even saying, well, the Bhagavatam says this happened when Krishna was in Vrindavan, but actually the other thing happened. To give you an example at an ISKCON, if you go to Vrindavan, let's say, and you are associated with ISKCON devotees, and they're there's some famous storytellers in Vrindavan, ISKCON devotees. And I don't think anyone ever asked them, like, where did that story come from? One time, a well-known ISKCON sannyasi was giving me a tour around Govardhan, and it's like every 5 steps. And here, one time, the gopis came up to Krishna, and they said this to him, and Krishna did that, and then, like everywhere we went, there was a story. And then finally, I just said, where do all these stories come from? How do you know they're true? And he was very startled because no one had ever asked him that. And he'd like taken everyone around Govardhan. And then he said, well, no one ever asked me that. And he had no idea where the stories came from. So, but what this shows is that the Vaishnavas tend to be very strict on philosophy and very relaxed on Leela details. So they'll even say, well, the Bhagavatam says this, but actually that. But they will never do that when it comes to philosophy or Siddhanta. By the way, the word Siddhanta, which means a philosophical conclusion, is a more modern word from Lord Chaitanya's time, around that time. And in the Bhagavatam, you will not find the word Siddhanta for a philosophical conclusion. The word is Tattva. Vedanti Tattva Vidas Tattvam Yad, or Krishna says in the famous Gita verse, approach spiritual master and Upadekshante Gyanam Gyanis Tattva Darshina. Oh, where's Tattva Darshina? Those who have seen Tattva will teach you. But anyway, so Prabhupada, in fact, toward the end of his stay in this world, Prabhupada had a serious plan to let his disciples translate the verses in the Bhagavatam, and he would just do the purports, because he actually wasn't even, okay, you do the verses, I really am focused on the purports. So therefore, within our culture, Gaudiya Vaishnava culture, disagreeing or giving different views of Leela details is not considered a big deal.
I always thought it had to do with time and circumstance. Like, if you are reading the Bhagavatam in the 1970s when it came out, you would probably not understand a woman getting offended by her hair being touched, but you would totally understand a woman getting.
Yeah, because actually, I mean, consider, for example, how foot intensive our culture is in Krishna consciousness, like worshiping the lotus feet and serving the feet. I mean, it doesn't mean that if you really want to please your guru, you have to become a pedicurist. But clearly, the feet have a very strong symbolic meaning, because it's the lowest part of the body. It's a part of the body in touch with kind of like the, not very clean streets and everything. But you have this very powerful symbolism of the head. So for example, consider this. Ashwatthama, horse whinny. That's actually what it means. Ashwa means horse, and Tama is an abbreviation of stama, which means the sound a horse makes. Like that. Can anyone do that better than me? No. Anyway, so if someone wants a big break into, ISKCON theater, this is your chance. Anyway, so Ashwatthama killed the 5 sleeping sons of Draupadi in this incredible atrocity. And so Arjuna and Krishna found him, tied him up, and the Bhagavatam says dragged him like an animal. They didn't even treat him like a human being. They dragged him like an animal back to Draupadi, where the Pandavas camp was. And of course, Bhima said, kill him at once. No surprise there. So Bhima said, and Draupadi said, Muchatam Esha, let him go. And she said, what she said was very compassionate. She said, his mother is innocent, and I don't want to cause this same agony to his mother that I'm feeling. So it's a very powerful statement. But still, from Krishna's point of view, yes, and this is very interesting, because Draupadi and Bhima are both pure devotees. And so devotees always say things like, what's the Vedic position on cloning? What's the Vedic position on, vacuum cleaners? But the point is, on like material ethical issues, they disagree because it's not absolute philosophy. And so this is a moral issue. Do you kill him? Do you give him a lesser sentence? And so two pure devotees are disagreeing on a material moral issue. So they turn to Krishna, and Krishna has to decide what to do. And so he has two pure devotees, so he has to find the middle path. So he cuts off Ashwatthama's hair where he had sort of his crown jewel. That was his pride. He had this jewel. Now, from our point of view, modern point of view, okay, this guy killed 5 sleeping young men. What's the proper punishment? Give him a funny haircut. I mean, think about it. It's like, what? That sounds like anything but justice from our point of view. But in that culture, that was an unbearable humiliation. And the Bhagavatam even says that that is the way you kill a Brahman. It's not daiha, from the word deha, body. It's not physical killing, but you totally humiliate him. So, I mean, Ashwatthama was so humiliated, basically, he couldn't show his face in human society. And so what that shows is that he's basically just driven out of human society. But what that shows is, so take that cultural principle, go back to Draupadi, they grabbed her hair. So within that culture, and you can say, well, we're more practical nowadays, or they had these powerful symbols which governed how you could treat other people's bodies. And the result of it was people were very careful how they treated other people's bodies. I mean, from our point of view, it's like that's strange. From their point of view, we're a bunch of slobs. We don't make any fine distinctions. We don't have like any subtle culture, just a bunch of kind of barbarians. So in the context of that culture, grabbing Draupadi's hair was punishable by death. Punishable by death. And the sentence was carried out, and they were killed. So it's a very different picture, isn't it, of the role of women. So anything else? It's getting a little, oh my God, that's not the time, is it?
Yes.
It's your fault. You did it. Yes.
Can you say something about Street Dharma? You mentioned
Street Dharma. That means women's Dharma. Well, not so much, because we don't get a lot of details. We can extrapolate from all these stories. We know that the relationship between men and women was give and take. And ultimately, among civilized men and women, it wasn't that the man has the last word or the woman has the last word. It was basically whoever has a more intelligent idea has the last word. Oh, whew, yes. Bring it on. So, so as far as Gandhari, thank God in heaven, the Bhagavatam doesn't say she blindfolded herself. Yeah, really. Personally, I never liked that story. Oh, I'll just finish. Oh, Amala Kirtan.
yes. Yes, come.
Okay, come on over. I'll wind up within the next hour and a half. So, okay, maybe this will be the last question, and then Amala Kirtan.
Yes.
You,
You also promised me last night that you were going to talk tonight about when you took sannyas.
Okay.
We can talk about it till tomorrow.
Okay.
There will be a cake, and so at that time we.
No. I'll finish in 5 or 10 minutes. I'll finish actually.
I put them up.
Seu não sei quê. Okay, so Gandhari, I personally was always kind of horrified by the idea of Gandhari blinding yourself. I mean, blindfolded basically means blinding. And the reason given, I thought was like, seriously? The reason given was because a woman can never be better than her husband in anything. But the fact is, I don't think I've ever read about a single couple in anywhere in the Bhagavatam Mahabharata where the woman wasn't better than her husband at something. So therefore, the idea that a woman cannot be better is like, no. I mean, practically every marriage I've ever heard of or you've ever seen in this, nowadays, the woman, unless the woman's really like this really beautiful total loser, like, the man just married her for her looks and she just like, literally can't boil water or tie her shoelaces. But I would say among all the couples I've seen, I can't remember ever seeing a couple of people who were like functional human beings where the woman wasn't better than her husband at something. So, and then the last thing, Jaya Govinda, we're wrapping up now. You know an exception? What would that be? What's that? Oh, Jaya Govinda. Anyway, if you know Jaya Govinda's sad story, you won't need any further explanation. So then, okay, now wrapping up here, because otherwise he is my disciple and he's very faithful and loving, but he still might sue me. And so, as far as when I took sannyas, I have to give a lot of credit to my former wife. It was really, she's a great soul, extraordinary preacher, and I could not have taken sannyas without her permission. I knew that because I'd seen what happened to some of my friends that tried to get sannyas from Prabhupada. And so she's, great devotee, deserves a lot of credit. And of course, when I took sannyas, she was already old enough and mature to carry on. She was 18. She was 18 years old when I took sannyas. All I can say is, we didn't know anything about the real. I mean, we couldn't imagine that you could ever live outside a temple. It was unimaginable. It was unimaginable that we could ever live outside of a Hare Krishna temple. Anyway, so when I took sannyas, one last little detail. And this is about Kirtan, about Prabhupada's Kirtan. When Prabhupada came for our sannyas ceremony, and he sat down on the Vyas asana, and instead of chanting Radha Madhava, as he always did, he chanted Bhaja Hudayamana. And it was so ecstatic, I swear to God. And I was, I was a Hare Krishna. I wasn't on any drug. And so I was standing in the back of the old temple room, which is actually, I think, nicer. I was standing in the old temple room in the back watching Prabhupada chant. And it was like the whole temple room was dancing. I mean, the building, not the people in it. It was so ecstatic. It's like the whole temple room was dancing and moving to the power of Prabhupada singing. And when he said, like, Sita, if you know the words of the Bhaja Hudayamana, my realization was Prabhupada was preaching through that song to his spiritual children who were about to take sannyas. That don't ever think you can be happy in the material world. And and I had that very strong realization that Prabhupada was personally speaking to me as a spiritual father to a spiritual son, saying, don't ever be cheated and think that you can be happy without Krishna. So I mean, lots of other stories, some of them pretty funny at my expense, but I'll tell that later. So thank you all very much. What time is it really? 8:51. It says 11 here. Oh, that's because you're from the East Coast.
Yes, I am. Sorry.
Isn't that what they say? Levem susto. Those are important. Yeah, well, Bhakta. You want me to keep my phone centered in what you did that on purpose? That was a yes, that was a joke. That was not a joke. It was a joke. Okay. Dude never lied. It's sitting on the right station.
The rat.
No, no. That's all right. You just took That's so anxious to finish. I thought, oh my God, it's almost midnight.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, I never changed it.
No, but it's good. I mean, it's good I stopped it. But we covered a lot of points.
Yes, it was great. I mean, we could hear you forever, honestly. It was really nice. Should chart it.
Whoa! That was on purpose.
I know.
Gurudeva Kripa Jaya Guru Dasina Pekakirina Sakala Sahane Baladiya Guru Nijamanis Vihahina Sakale Samana Gurute Sakati Devunaka Jata Jata Sakale Samana Gurute Sakati Tabito Gaigo Marina Masuke Aparada Maha-bharata Tabito Gaigo Marina Vino Kripa, Labiyahe Janakitata Haipenata. Vino Kripa, Labiyahe Janakitata Haipenata. Shakti Buddhihina, Amiyati Dina, Moro More Atmasata. Jogata vichare, kichu nahi pae, tumhara karuna shara. Jogata vichare, kichu nahi pae, tumhara karuna shara. Karuna na hoile, kandiya kandiya, prana na rakiwara. Karuna na hoile, kandiya kandiya, prana na rakiwara. Gurudev Adipati Tutiya, Guru Nase Chinamrika Tirina. Gurudev Adipati Tutiya, Guru Nase Chinamrika Tirina.
Camera. Sorry.
Sakala Sahane, Guru Nijamane Srihara. Sakala Sahane, Malachiye Guru Nijamane Srihara. Sakale Shamana, Purite Shakti Deha Nata Jata Jata. Sakale Shamana, Purite Shakti Deha Nata Jata Jata. Kabito Gaibo, Hari Namasuke, Aparana Hame Mata. Kabito Gaibo, Hari Namasuke, Aparana Hame Mata. Kabe Vino Kripa, Labiyahe Janakitata Haipenata. Kabe Vino Kripa, Labiyahe Janakitata Haipenata. Shakti Buddhihina, Amiyati Dina, Guru More Atmasata. Shakti Buddhihina, Amiyati Dina, Guru More Atmasata. Jogata vichare, kichu nahi pae, tumhara karuna shara. Jogata vichare, kichu nahi pae, tumhara karuna shara. Karuna na hoile, kandiya kandiya, prana na rakiwara. Jaya 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 Dev Jaya Sula Jaya Dev
Jaya 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 Dev, Jaya Dev, Jaya 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 Dev.
Jaya 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 Dev Jaya Dev Jaya Sula Jaya Dev Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare
Krishna